Hello and welcome to a special edition of the Cardiff Central podcast. Unfortunately, it's a full focus on off-field matters this week, with Cardiff having gone into administration and been bought out of it by the Welsh Rugby Union. We'll be looking at how the club got to this point, what the current state of play is, and what the future looks like for the Blue and Blacks. Joining me on the panel this week, we've got two of our regular panelists, Steve Coombs. Steve, how are you?
About as well as can be expected.
And Andrew Ford. Andrew, how are you?
Yeah, good, thanks, despite the circumstances.
And we're very pleased to be joined by the chair of the CF10 Rugby Trust, in amongst multiple media appointments this week, Lynn Glaister. Lynn, how are you?
Tired, but a lot happier than I was. A lot happier than I was yesterday.
Certainly been an interesting few days. Just to give sort of a brief summary, rumours started circulating sort of over the weekend and into Monday morning about the club's financial position. It turned out that Helford Capital, the club's owners, the vehicle put together by Neil Griffith and Phil Kemp, were given until Monday night to produce any money that was owed to the WRU as part of the professional rugby agreement. That didn't happen. Players and staff were then told on Tuesday of the intent to go into administration, which happened on Wednesday, with PricewaterhouseCoopers appointed, and the club was immediately sold to the Welsh Rugby Union, with a press conference taking place last evening. We're recording this on Thursday morning, with Alan Jones, Richard Holland, Richard Collier-Keywood and Abby Tierney. Lynn, I come to you first. It's been an interesting few days. I suspect you've been on the phone a lot and chatting to a lot of people. What is it, the timeline been like for you, and what's your reaction to the what's unfolded over the last few days?
Like, I'd like to assure other supporters that I knew nothing other than everybody else knew until Sunday night, when I was given the heads up that things were going to move very quickly. And that was quite an initial. I was actually driving to Bristol on a day out in the sun, and then that came, and it sort of. So I then spent quite a bit of time sitting in a park by Bristol, the suspension bridge, sort of trying to work out who do I call, what do I say, and my friend who was with me, who couldn't know anything about it, doing all whatever it was we were going to do. It's been a bit crazy, but I think after the initial shock, I think I reconciled myself pretty quickly to thinking, you know what, this is going to be the best outcome we can get out of what's a pretty awful situation. And once you've accepted that, then I think there's going to be many problems along the way, but actually we've come out of this a lot better than a lot of other clubs. I mean, thank God for the weird nature and fabric of Welsh rugby, really, that because if we London Irish, Worcester, Jersey, Wasps, well, not so good, but at least because of the way our league works and the way our rugby works, the WRU can effectively appoint us straight back to where we were.
Steve, I know you've got a lot to say on the two gentlemen, Griffith and Kemp, involved, but I suspect there'll be an element of supporters who kind of think, it's pointing the finger at these two and using them almost like scapegoating. But I mean, the truth is, like, they have properly tucked us up, haven't they?
Well, quite clearly they've tucked us up. I think there was signs all the way through that something wasn't quite right. I mean, it's easy to be, to look back in hindsight and see the signs, but there were always the odd little thing that just seemed odd. I mean, from our perspective with the trust, the people we were dealing with hadn't really changed. The chairman of Cardiff had remained the same, chief executive remained the same. The Cardiff board had basically been the same as it had been before Helford had come in. And I found that odd, because if I were a wealthy man putting my money into a rugby club, I would probably either want to be chairman or have my guys involved. And the longer that went on, I just had this nagging thought that if this was my money, I'd want my guys involved. So maybe it's not their money, or maybe there's no money. And I think I found out Monday morning about 7:30, and I think my first thought was, is it too early to drink? In the end, I did what Lynn seemed to do, and go for a bit of a walk around the park. But then my next thought was sort of frustration at myself, not because I have any real influence over the situation, but because I didn't voice my concerns a bit more. And I think probably that was, I don't know about what Lynn thinks, but that was always nagging in the back of our minds. I think from supporters' perspective, there's going to be, well, there has been a lot of rage directed towards the current board, or I guess we can now say the former board, the past board. Why didn't they make their concerns clear earlier? And yeah, those questions will have to be explored. Have they handled it? But ultimately, yeah, the blame has to rest with the two shysters, the two bastards, the pond life. And I'd rather not refer to them as Helford Capital, because I think that gives them a certain amount of distance and a certain amount of anonymity. Their names are Philip Kemp and Neil Griffith. And yeah, I have a lot to say about them, which maybe I better leave for offline.
Have to get the bleep button going in the background. Yeah. Andrew, from your point of view, probably picking stuff up. There was Twitter was ablaze with rumor on Monday as stuff slowly came out. What has been your sort of reaction to the news as it's leaked out and then came out fully sort of Tuesday night into Wednesday?
Yeah, I was excuse me, I'd seen that there were various tweets going around about what was going on, and it was all kind of quite vague. So I didn't really know exactly what was going on. I was trying to communicate with mates to try and get an idea of what it could possibly be. And then I think before kind of the news broke, I think it was Tuesday afternoon, news broke about Cardiff going into administration. I'd found out through the grapevine about half an hour before. So kind of when it was announced, it wasn't too much of a surprise at that point. But when I was told about it, I didn't realize it had reached that point. So yeah, I was quite naturally shocked. But like Lynn said, once I'd kind of processed it and realized, this isn't like kind of a Worcester, London Irish or Wasp situation, kind of got my head around that. And yeah, it's far from ideal, but kind of I got quite a nice few messages from people on Twitter as well saying they were thinking of me, which was very kind. But yeah, kind of been a bit of a whirlwind last 72 hours.
Absolutely, and there's been a lot of good comment from supporters of other clubs. Obviously, like we enjoy being hated a little bit, but but no, I think the rugby community does come together quite well at moments like this. Moving on to sort of to get into how we got here a bit, Steve. I think a lot of the questions will be on the due diligence and sort of fit and proper persons test. Richard Collier keyword in the press conference last evening, saying that the WRU won't be using the company that they used based in London for those tests again. Obviously, it quickly became clear, judging by the comments, that there wasn't much money forthcoming from Griffith and Kemp. Looking at that process, there's obviously, I think, learnings for the WRU in terms of how in depth they're doing. Is there also something from the club itself to say that as much as they needed to use the WRU as part of the RPA, they should have been doing their own bits and pieces in the background as well?
I mean, yeah, across the board, you have to say that process wasn't good enough. I mean, that's quite clear. I think from the club's perspective, they possibly, as well as the WRU's due diligence test, they perhaps leaned on personal relationships, because Philip Kemp in particular and Griffith had been in and around the club for actually quite some time. So they were known, there was a personal relationship there with individuals. So I think possibly they will have leaned into that a bit, and that would have made it that much more easy to put faith in them, rather than if they'd been people who'd come completely out of the blue. But yeah, from the club's perspective going forward, and I mean, when we talk about the club, the club's attitude toward it. We're talking about a new group of people now. There's going to be a new chair, there's going to be a new group of people running it. And you would expect and certainly hope that they learn from the past. As Richard Collier-Keywood has indicated last night, the union would also learn from their past experiences. I don't live in the world of finance and due diligence, so I don't know to what extent you can always trust that process. There's always going to be gaps in there, I would imagine. But not using the same people in future seems like a wise thing to do.
Andrew, the sort of view of these sort of due diligence tests is that perhaps in the modern world, they're quite easy to get past now. I think this, obviously Cardiff are not the first people to have fallen foul to this sort of thing. We've seen dodgy owners, particularly Worcester, and those same people involved with Morecambe FC, and then other football examples as well, the current Reading FC owner and Bury going bust. As a sort of supporter of a professional sports team, do we just sort of have to live with this risk that this might happen now? You know, professional sports is loss making, and we just hope and pray that the people produce the money on time and when it's needed.
Yeah, I guess to an extent, particularly in kind of professional rugby at the moment, there's not a huge amount of profit to be had from owning a rugby club by any means. But I think it's one of those things of I just question what was the thought process of Neil Griffith and Phil Kemp kind of going into this. That what did they think they were getting out of this? And
Yeah,
that's
sorry, sorry, Andrew,
no,
if
it's
I
all
could just
right.
jump in there. One reason where I personally gave them the benefit of the doubt is if you were going to try to scam Cardiff Rugby Club, I'm not entirely sure how you do it, because Cardiff Athletic Club, of course, owns the Arms Park. So it's not like you could come in and be an asset stripper and take the land or something like that. That's not an option. And thinking about the Pond Life, Griffith and Kemp, I'm not sure what they've got out of this, because from what I can make out, they have actually put in a significant amount of money, just not not what they should have or not on time. So at the moment, it looks like they've paid in a significant amount of cash to come out the other end looking like complete bastards and actually pretty stupid. What they've done is really, really dumb. So I'm not too sure what they've got out of it. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I'm a member of the Cardiff Athletic Club, and I haven't got a clue what the system and what the organisation is there. I think it's one of those situations where you think, thank God for the Cardiff Athletic Club. You don't often say that,
big
do
fan
you?
of Cardiff Athletic Club.
I think we've all become big fans of organisations that we probably wouldn't have otherwise thought we were big fans of in the last few weeks.
Sorry to interrupt, Andrew, but
No, and I'm sorry.
No, it's all good.
Lynn, I wanted to ask about a question that came up in the most recent notes of the meeting between CF10 and Richard Holland. It was on the 20th of February, and he, when asked about rumours circulating on social media, said that the club was operating within normal accounting parameters and supporters do not need to be concerned. I think that's done the rounds a little bit on social media in the last couple of days.
Yeah.
To sort of, not to stand in Dickie's defence or anything, but I mean, they clearly would have known that stuff wasn't quite right then, just a couple of weeks ago. I suppose, is that a lose-lose scenario in that if you come out and say it's going down the pan and then you cause panic and people start running around losing their heads, versus sort of being transparent with supporters?
I mean, I used words about the way that perhaps we've been talked to about things like that a day or two ago, you sort of think, were we being played and all that kind of thing. But actually, when you actually look at it, there was no way he could have said anything different. And I think that actually what they've been doing, what happened yesterday for the club to go into administration and then for the WRU to immediately take it over, that didn't happen overnight. So I think history may well look more kindly on what Richard and Alan have done. and that they actually realised there was a problem, and they've done their damnedest to make sure that we got out of it. I think when and if we have our next meeting on the 7th of May, I think it is, with the club, and hopefully when, I think I'll be clear to say, if you can't say anything, just tell us, sorry, we can't talk about that, because that's better than trying to do anything different, really.
In terms of sort of where we are now then, get into that, Lynn, as far as you're aware, is it sort of business as usual? Does life carry on now at the club, in terms of, with ticket sales and fixtures being continued and contracts moving over to the new, staying with where they are really, but with the WRU as owners now?
Well, once they finally get the ticket system working again, because I think presumably there's some issue with bank accounts and, linking things and getting that working again. Once that's it, yes. I mean, I think that was very much what I've been told, is that it's business as usual, except that perhaps it shouldn't be business quite as usual. It should be better business, really. But but from the players' point of view and the coaches, they'll be turning up for training. Tickets will be sold. We will have we've still got our, luckily, thanks to our ludicrous but amazing relationship with the CAC, we still have a ground to play on. So everything like that is still there. I mean, it's clearly not business as usual, because in the background they're going to appoint a chair. That chair will have views, I'm sure, about who will run the club in the future. But and people like Mike, Mike Brown, our amazing comms guy, I'm sure business is not usual for him today, so I think it's going to be I think it's a bit of a mix. I think the business of playing rugby and getting rugby played and turning up at Judgment Day and turning up at Munster and all the other games will happen, and that's great, and the tickets will go on sale. And I think we should make a big thing about, let's pack cap, let's actually do that, and sort of, but I'm sure it's not business as usual in many other ways.
Yeah, business as usual for those two games, and then maybe we run out of money and don't have to go to South Africa. I don't know, maybe if that's the consideration there. Steve, obviously, there'll be a lot of sort of talk about figures at the club, but clearly they've known for a while that this was going on in the background. Lynn mentioned there that that Dickie was clearly sort of under pressure in terms of what he could and couldn't say. Is there an element of credit towards Richard Holland and to Alan Jones and the WRU, who we all love to sort of get stuck into, in terms of the speed with which they've turned this around from the club going into administration to being bought, and the work the WRU have done to make sure that after Steve Phillips they're on a financial footing where they can do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of credit probably has to go to RBT&E. There's clearly a different relationship now between 4 professional teams and the union. If this had happened under the stewardship of Steve Phillips, would we be in this situation now where essentially things are going to continue as they were? I would say that's unlikely. RBT&E has received a lot of stick on social media, probably including some from us. I've heard separately from people who know her personally that she's someone of character, that she's essentially a good person, and she's definitely demonstrated that with the way this has been handled. I think if you're looking at it from a supporter's point of view, this has all happened overnight. It's quite clear now that this has not happened overnight. Just before we came on, I was reading a statement from the administrators, who also say they've been talking to the club for quite some time. The union clearly have. This is something that's been put together as a plan B over a length of time, and it appears to have been done pretty successfully. The most important thing in all this really is the employees of the club, the players and the other staff at the club. I'm sure Richard Holland and Alan Jones would say that they've been their priority, and you'd have to say they fulfilled that commitment. They've been seen right. There's a version of this where this got a lot worse. All that said, I think going forward, new faces will be needed. And there will quite understandably be a lot of criticism of Alan Jones and Richard Holland. In the fullness of time, we may get a different picture. History may judge them a bit more kindly. But yeah, I think when the dust settles, there's some credit to give to people, probably particularly on the union side, as well as the piss and vinegar, which people like me are going to dish out.
I emailed Abby Turney to thank her for the part that she played in ensuring our success. I emailed her on, can't even remember what night it is. Is it Thursday now? So probably Tuesday night. Asking her if she would meet with us, because I wanted to discuss the makeup of the board, before it actually got decided and things like that. And fair play to her, she replied to me personally within 2 hours. I mean, she didn't give me a date, and she didn't give me. I mean, she said she will meet, but didn't actually give me a date. But she did actually reply and thanked us for our, for what we said. Yeah, I mean, I think with Alan Jones, at risk of being controversial to a lot of people who want to think he's the bad guy, I think he's a fundamentally decent guy who's clearly very good at the job that he has done for decades as a lawyer. And I think that we will realise that he has done a hell of a job to actually make sure that we've come out of this. I think there are lessons to be learnt for a new chair. And one of them is that actually, if you don't build relationships with supporter groups and supporters generally, then where are the people who will actually back you in it when things are bad? And I'm chair of CF10. When we're not, I like to think that we've got some influence. We meet with Richard Holland many times a year. I have never had a meeting with Alan Jones. I've met him a couple of times. He's been invisible, and I think that's been his Achilles heel when it comes to people who will recognise it. But I think he will. I think we do have some thanks for him, and it must be a terrible time for him. But he's done his best to get us out of what was a situation that we got into, I think. And I think that's probably true. I think that's true of Richard as well, that they've clearly done a hell of a job over the last few months, working against the owners of the club that they're involved in. Richard was an employee of Cardiff Rugby that was owned by those bastards.
Certainly. Just a couple more things on that. Listening to Alan Jones at the press conference yesterday, you're seeing a guy who's hurting there. I find that sort of the hurt he's expressing absolutely credible, and I found myself sympathizing with him. One kind of ongoing debate we've had within CF10 and with David Allen, support director, is the amount of communication that's come out from Alan Jones, and the argument on the one hand that that's not his style, and that's kind of fair enough. Not everybody wants to be in the press. But on the other hand, supporters want a sense of openness and communication. And I think that is a big lesson going forward, where in the future, you can't afford to be aloof. I think supporters are going to expect a lot more communication. And the other thing, just with the WRU, a little bit of contrition. As a trust, we've been critical of the amount of time it's taken to get the new PRA signed and what's going on there. It's quite clear now that Cardiff were the problem. And any criticism we directed at Darby Teeney personally there, we should probably take back as it was actually our fault.
Good point.
Yeah, well said. I think just from my personal point of view on Alan Jones, I've come across him once or twice, and I think it should be stressed as well to people that it's not really his nature, I think, to be sort of front and center, as Stephen Lynn have rightly said, whether that's correct or not for a chairman. But I think certainly when he came in, his role in terms of sort of reining Peter in to a degree as still the man with the money there will come out as being quite important as well, and getting the club in a position where they can work with the WRU on this. I don't think that would have happened without Alan, as much as I'm so sure there'll be a couple of people listening to this who'll be disappointed that we haven't sort of stuck the boot in on him a bit. And yeah, there's raw emotions in that sense. But yeah, I agree that in the fullness of time, he will probably come out of this as looking quite good. Andrew, from your point of view, I wonder, just in general, in terms of now being a union-owned club, it's something that we've all sort of said many times over the years. No, thank you. That's not for me. I wouldn't stick around if that was the case. However, obviously, none of us sort of said that if it was a choice between going bust and being union-owned, what that would be. Is there obviously like more relief, or is there still like a level of anxiousness about being union-owned and what that means for being sort of independently competitive as a club?
Yeah, there's definitely a level of anxiousness. Like you said, I don't think any of us have particularly wanted to be owned by the union at any point, and even in the short term, I'm not sure how it's going to look. You know, it was hardly a great dragon side, excuse me, when they were owned by the WRU, but they seem to insist that they'd want to kind of get us into private ownership as soon as possible. What it's going to look like, kind of in the short term, I'm not sure, but I imagine there's still. I saw a few comments on Twitter about how is recruitment going to look going into next season. I don't imagine there's going to be a huge difference there, but I'm happy to be corrected. But yeah, I feel like Steve, you sent the article just before recording this that there are people interested in Cardiff. So that's certainly a positive going forward, and see if anything comes from that. But obviously, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a few months, possibly more than a couple of years till something happens, but hopefully sooner rather than later.
We had a message from Ben on Twitter who suggested that Ray Lilo transition from being a player to a board member now as his next step in his career. But Steve, in terms of the chairman, obviously Alan Jones is now stepping down. He won't be the chairman. The WRU will appoint their own man. Aside from Ray being the first player / chairman in history, what sort of figure are we looking for as chairman? Not necessarily a name, but is it like a known Cardiff rugby figurehead? Are we looking for an experienced business person? It's going to be tricky, isn't it, to find somebody who isn't a WRU person that sort of works for us independently, but also is somebody who can work with the WRU then as well.
I mean, I think if you're talking about the qualities you want in the individual, I think before you look at it being a Cardiff rugby man or perhaps even a Welsh rugby man, you want someone who feels credible, who feels like projects trust, and who has a track record of being trustworthy and being competent. Because that chairman, part of they've got a huge job on their hands. They have to obviously play a big role in putting a new board together, perhaps a new chief executive, but has yet to be seen. They're going to have to restore trust in the brand. There's huge reputational damage to the club, that goes without saying. So the most important thing is it's someone who projects that kind of credibility. There probably are people like that out there. I think we can probably think of one or two names, but it's probably wrong to speculate at the moment. But yeah, that individual right now is the most important person in the history of Cardiff Rugby Club. Not to put any pressure on them, right?
Good luck to them coming in. Lynn, I wonder from a CF10 point of view, obviously one of the major sort of achievements that CF10 have had is getting a supporter director on the board. It was one of the major drivers between setting up the trust in the first place and building that bridge between the club and supporters. The likelihood now is that David Allen, who I did ask to come on this pod, by the way, just to put it out there, obviously he felt that understandably at this moment it probably wasn't quite right for him to be speaking publicly, but he did commit to come on in the future, so hopefully we'll get him on towards the end of the season or just after it. But I wonder how important you think it is that when this new board is built by the chairman of the WRU, that they retain that supporter director and have that link.
Well, I mean, the one thing is, I mean, we've been very pleased about the role, but the reality was it was a supporter advisor. They sat with the board and had full speaking rights in the board, but they weren't a director. And when it actually came to the final few meetings, they weren't able to be in those meetings along with any other advisor because I'm not quite clear, but it's to do with legal reasons that directors are covered under whatever sort of protections there are for boards. So, I think actually that we want more than we've got now. I think what we want is a supporter director sitting on that board, and that's what we have resolved to make clear to Abby Turney, and that's what we're going to aim for. I mean, I think you only have to look at different sports. I mean, I think yes, okay, you've got the money men, usually men, aren't they? That get to own clubs, but we've seen the debates in Parliament and in the Senate about the need to keep that link with supporters and for the supporters to have a say in those type of things. I think it's massively important that they do give us, that we get a supporter director, and then it's a matter of how that person is then appointed and can have the trust of supporters. I think David's done a fantastic job, actually, and he was absolutely the perfect person to be the first supporter advisor, and get re-elected or renominated unanimously, because I think we've all seen that he's a man of integrity who speaks up when he needs to. It may well be David in the future, and I wouldn't be, I wouldn't object to that, but it might not be. But we agreed that actually what we need is the principle that we have a supporter director, and then it's worked out how that person is appointed.
Yeah, I think integrity is a good word to use for David. I think everyone who's dealt with him holds him in high esteem, and I think if he were to be involved in future, we'd support him. I completely understand if he thinks it's inappropriate or now doesn't want to be, but yeah, I think we still hold him in the high esteem we did prior to all this. And just generally on supporter involvement in Cardiff and any sports team, I think things like this kind of make the argument for us. This goes for all 4 teams in Wales really, and any professional sports team. Incidents like this make the argument clear for supporter involvement, the involvement of people who care about the club, and greater transparency and openness.
Absolutely. There was one question on Twitter from Mark as well, which I noticed just before coming on. He was asking about the £9 million debt and whether that's inclusive of the COVID loan. I've asked the question, and my understanding is that it is. There's sort of between £4.5 million worth of COVID loan. There's also somewhere between £3 and £3.5 million worth of extra loan that we took from the WRU around the time that the last PRA was being negotiated, which totals the majority of that £9 million debt to the WRU. I suspect there's probably a bit of back payment in there that Health with Capital haven't made as well. So I don't think it's obviously a large number, but I don't think supporters should be overly concerned by that. There was always a plan for the COVID debt to be taken on by the WRU as part of the new PRA. and the extra 3.5 million was being paid back as sort of deductions from the payments they were making us as the new one. So yeah, I think Richard Collier-Keywood mentioned it, and it stuck out as quite a large figure initially. Unless anyone's got any different knowledge on that, I think that's probably not as bad as it sounds on paper.
You're probably right, but I think probably at some point talking to the wonderful Hugh Jones, who would actually understand what it was all about, because it's not my area of expertise. But yeah, it sounds awful, but it's probably not as bad.
Yeah, because the COVID loan was going to be taken on by the WRU and the new PRA, but as we know, the new PRA has been signed, so it's going to include that, isn't it? I think the reality is that's a debt that would have been manageable and serviceable, particularly once the new PRA was signed, if Helford Capital were holding up their end. Each of the teams in Wales has investors who have agreed to put in a certain amount, and they didn't.
Looking forward to the future then, Andrew. Obviously, as we talked about, there's the comment from the administrators about potential new buyers. There's, I think it was Collier-Keywood again who mentioned that they ideally would only like to keep hold of Cardiff up to the end of, I think it was the 26-27 season, when the next sort of agreement with the URC and the TV deals run out. But from a supporter perspective, are we sort of very keen to jump straight back into private ownership and be seen as maybe rushing into it? Or is there sort of an element where we think, let's relax, let's reset under the WRU for a bit? There's a bit of sort of solidity there with them, whilst not ideal, and we sort of build from there?
Yeah, probably need to chill out a bit, at least going forward. I don't think we want to go into the exact same situation we've just come out of now. That would be a disaster. But I'm not sure what kind of I've obviously been reading kind of what Richard Collier-Keywood was saying, and how the approach of they still see Cardiff operating just like all three other clubs. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that kind of develops, and how if it's similar to how we've operated the last few years, or whether there's going to be that union involvement. I'm quite intrigued. And it's kind of something to see down the line, I guess, of, in a year's time, how is this kind of relationship worked out? If there's interest then going from private owners, that how keen are we to kind of push on then? And obviously you'd want a proper due diligence done on any new owners going forward.
Andrew, as well, just there's a few comments online about, would this have happened if it wasn't Cardiff and that sort of thing, and they even though there was good support out there, they still managed to slide a little bit in like that. But I wonder, obviously we are heavily biased in this regard, but how important is it for their Welsh Rugby to have Cardiff and to have a team playing in the Arms Park bang next door to the Principality, and the optics, if that wasn't happening, they wouldn't be great. And also, is there a weird sort of scenario where, together with the WRU, we build something Leinster-ish over the next year or two? We obviously have a large population area. We produce a lot of players that many of whom don't always come through the Cardiff pathway for reasons of other clubs and education establishments offering them deals elsewhere. But if something like that was on the table, would we go for that?
Yeah, to touch on the whole thing of people saying, would they do it with other clubs? I think the key comments that I saw were that their kind of obligations with TV and with the league mean that they would lose more money if they hadn't taken over Cardiff. And obviously the same would then apply to the other three sides. So I think in that scenario, it would apply to the other three sides. Whether that would actually happen is another question. But you're spot on in terms of, I don't think there should, you can't have no rugby in the capital city, no professional rugby side in the capital city, while the national team are playing next door. And kind of we've seen the attendance as Cardiff have had over the last 2 seasons, to compare that to the other 3 sides. It's kind of night and day. But yeah, in a nice world, we could kind of become a Leinster-like side. But I think, knowing WRU's track record, I don't think that's going to be the case.
I like that Leinster light works in terms of not being quite as good as Leinster, and also the pack probably being quite lightweight still anyway. Lynn, I think there's obviously CAC, the athletic club, somebody who plays a big part, as we've mentioned, in the club. But they've sort of gone now from being heritage shareholders and a couple of seats on the board to then being minority shareholders and still 1 or 2 seats on the board. And now, as far as we're aware, there's no shares there, no seats on the board likely forthcoming for them. It's obviously rumbled on with them for many years now around the lease and the Arms Park, and I think like there's obviously more to it than just this. But to put it simply, I think everybody would agree that a long-term lease and a redevelopment of the Arms Park sort of secures the long-term future of Cardiff Rugby as well. They go hand in hand. Is there a world where actually that relationship with them being simplified as simply tenant and landlord now makes it easier, and with the guarantee of the WRU ownership for the time as well, makes it easier to negotiate with them and work something out long term?
There is a world that is possible. I suspect that won't be the world. My gut feeling is I just can't see them not having some kind of position on the board. You know, they were one of the key people that Abby and Richard and I presume Alan, met with. They got to effectively approve the plans on Monday night or whatever it was, Monday or Tuesday night. And they've been they're immensely supportive of it. They voted at the management committee, apparently. So I think, given that, you've got to feel that they won't have given up all their ability for influence lightly. Would be, and I had no idea, but knowing their track record, I think they will have found themselves some way of being somehow involved. So I think we will go on with a weird world. We'll go on. I think it might be easier for the WRU to negotiate with CAC for whatever development is needed. So I think that might be better. But whether if you drew an organisational chart and some kind of communication chart, it would be, I doubt very much.
There'd be a lot of lines on that chart,
Yeah.
a lot of directions.
Yeah.
Steve, we mentioned Richard Holland quite a lot on the pod now. Obviously, he took a lot of stick on social media over the last few days, as I suppose comes with the territory of being the CEO anyway. But I think whilst again, with the emotion and response and people calling for his head, I think when you look at it, there's probably nothing major in this sort of scenario of dealing with Kemp and Griffith and going into administration that you sort of would say that's an immediately resignationable act. Just on a maybe general level now where we are, he's been CEO for 14 years. He's we're obviously going into a bit of a reset now with the WRU. Would now be an ideal time to sort of get a new face in as CEO and for Richard to maybe explore something else himself on a personal level as well?
My own personal opinion is yes. I think going into the future, it needs to be a whole group of new faces, because as we've said, I think although there's been understandably a huge amount of criticism of him, it is a little bit more nuanced than that. And there are things about, how do I put it? There are positives from his time in charge over the past year or so. There have been positives at Cardiff Rugby Club. The growth of the academy, increasing crowd sizes despite everything that had happened in 2023 is actually quite an impressive result. But I think for the optics of it, it probably is time, as I say, for there to be a group of new faces. He has my sympathy, because I think throughout this period, he has done a lot of work to get us to a situation where there is continuation and no one is going to lose their jobs. But I think we would all like, if there's going to be a positive to come out of this, it's that there's a fresh start, and to get a proper fresh start, you need a fresh group of people. Yeah.
I think just from my personal point of view on that as well, like I've spoken to Dickie quite a lot over the last few years as I've somehow gathered some sort of social media following, and there's a lot of misconceptions about Dickie online. I find in terms of this sort of narrative that's appeared of him sort of playing people like puppets and putting his bidding out there and all that sort of stuff. From my point of view, I can honestly say I've never ever been asked by him to put any sort of narrative or tweet out or anything like that. And beyond that as well, I think there's a sort of element that he's sort of a bit self-serving or something along those lines in there. I find that his ultimate aim is always for Cardiff Rugby to succeed, and there's never been any doubt in my mind about that. I don't necessarily agree with every decision he's taken. I'm not going to say he's the not handing out world's greatest CEO mugs to him necessarily, but I think that there is certainly a lot of unfair comment relating to him, and that overall he's done a good job in many respects regarding that.
And also on the puppet master aspect, where you've got people on social media who seem to be appearing to be unofficial spokespeople for the club. I know for a fact that some of the lines they've been pushing are the exact opposite of what Richard Holland has believed. So if you're under the impression that there are individuals who have been very vocal online, who have been speaking on behalf of the club, that's not the case. Maybe they have sources of information, doesn't mean they're speaking on behalf of the club. And also on the point about contrition I mentioned earlier, there have been people who present themselves as having sources at the club who have been speaking vocally about going down to 3 sides. I personally have never gone along with that, mainly because I don't agree with it, but also because I think it's very disrespectful. We as a trust have never done that. And if I were one of those people, I would now sort of take the opportunity to hold my hands up and say, yes, I've been quite stupid and disrespectful.
Yeah. I mean, I think we massively underestimate how difficult the job of being the CEO of Cardiff Rugby has been for how many years. I think it's being a CEO, I don't know, I've never been one, but it would be a difficult, it can be a difficult job. But I imagine, the people you have to sort of please, the people you have to deal with, I mean, we all loved what Peter did for the club, but that won't have been an easy relationship to negotiate and to deal with, and actually, and now the current the past characters that have just gone, none of that's been easy. And actually, I think it absolutely has to be his choice, because I've got to say, I wouldn't be sorry if he stays, but I can't imagine in the long term or even medium term that he would probably want to. What stress he must have gone through over the last year, I don't think we know the half of. We'll never know. We'll never know the amount of. It sounds like being sort of apologetic for them, but actually there's always a deeper story, isn't there, than you see.
And I think, I mean, I haven't had as many dealings with him as you have, Lynn, but he gave us a hint of the level of stress and actually physical pain he was under back in 2023 and the crisis post the dealings with Steve Phillips. I can imagine it's been no different over the past few months. And it's very easy when you're on the outside to kind of point the finger and turn someone into the villain. In the case of Neil Griffin and Philip Camp, I think it's justified. In the case of Richard Holland, I think I would stand back a bit and remember that there's a human being there.
just to finish with this section on Dickie with his quote from yesterday evening. He was asked in the press conference, "Do you still have the hunger to carry on?" Holland replied, "That's a good question. It's been a tough period. I'll reflect and chat to Abby and Richard. I'll do what's right for the club and what's right for myself," which is, I think that sums it up nicely, probably, in, if you read between the lines there, the difficulties that have been had by him over the last couple of weeks. Coming towards the finish, then, Andrew, to try and finish on sort of a positive tone and stuff moving forward, rugby-wise, it is continue as usual. We've still got something to play for at the end of the season. We've still got a lot of good young players coming through. How optimistic should we still be about, particularly the rugby department and what Jockey and co can achieve on the field for the Blue and Blacks, not just towards the end of the season, but going forward as well?
Yeah, I imagine nothing really changes in kind of preparation. I imagine they haven't really been properly training this week, given there's no game on the weekend. But I imagine, like, on the pitch, on the training field, nothing changes, and it's the same approach. There's kind of an element that, in hindsight, is quite good that we didn't beat Connacht on Saturday, because it would have been absolute mayhem preparing for the game this Saturday, with the kind of backdrop of everything that's happened the last few days. But yeah, I feel like we definitely need to prioritise on getting a full house for the Munster game and trying to target a win for that, and in particular try and target a win at Judgment Day next door as well. And then hopefully, come South Africa, it's always a bit of a lottery playing out there, but hopefully we can get some sort of result and try and push on for a successful end of season.
It would also be good to win at Judgment Day to win the honourable Welsh Hub
Cup. Oh yes,
and then we can take that and maybe look for somebody's head to slam it over. I can think of two people who might enjoy doing that too. Lynn, from sort of CF10 angle, is what's next for you guys now to sort of, is it continue that critical friend role in terms of ensuring that the club continues as we know it, Cardiff Rugby, since 1876 and the Blue and Blacks and all that?
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to go away. We would love to start building, really, and sort of appeal for the supporters to really sort of get involved, and so those who aren't involved join us and make sure that we really are acting as a voice for all supporters. We're lots of our members are, including one that's not too far away, writing a book about the 150 years of Cardiff, and all that work will carry on, and I guess there'll be a bit of a new chapter at the end of that. We will be pressing to speak to Abby because and whoever the new chair is, we will be calling for a Q&A with whoever the new chair is, because we've failed miserably to get a Q&A for some time from the club, but I think it's going to be important for them to establish that. So we're not going away. I'm on a personal note, I'm going to go at 2:00 to be interviewed by Matthew Southcombe. I've just been arranging that while we've been talking, so I think after that, then perhaps but seriously, we will have a proper CF10 board meeting very shortly. We've had one every night this week so far, but we'll have a sort of full strategic one where we actually look at what we need to do and who we need to speak to. And if anybody's got any questions that they want us to put to anybody, let us know. We always put the questions, we don't always get the answers. And if we don't like the question, we'll sometimes say this has been asked by a member of our of our trust has asked.
Just to mop up on a few general questions that came in for the pod, Gareth and Mark both asked about whether this impacts future recruitment. As far as it's been explained to me, other than the obvious impact of whether a player now looks at the news and thinks maybe I don't want to sign for them or not, in terms of the work that Darren Allenson is doing, there is no impact. He continues to chase targets. Sounds like hopefully that's a non-Welsh qualified tight head, second row, and 13 thereafter. So that would be very positive indeed if they were to come in. And then Emlyn on Blue Sky just asked about how secure is our long-term future, and I guess the answer to that is how long is a piece of string to a degree. But I certainly it feels like we're in a decent enough spot considering the what has gone on. Any more for any more? If anyone's got any last thoughts at all?
Just one point I'd like to make. With the trust, we obviously talk about the history of the club a lot, and Blue and Black and 150 years of that. And I think you probably all know that I value that as much as anyone, probably more than most people. I'm literally writing the book on it. But there's something more important than that, which is that Cardiff Rugby Club, as it exists, it's not just the history and it's the employees, it's the players, but it's also the player pathway. And we represent and we're responsible for the player pathway into professional rugby for a huge chunk of Wales. And there are young rugby players kind of coming into the game now, in school now, dreaming of being professional rugby players, dreaming of potentially playing for Wales. And we have a responsibility to manage that dream and give them the best opportunity possible. And one of the reasons that I find Neil Griffith and Philip Kemp despicable is because they play games not only with employees' livelihoods, but with that dream that young rugby players have. And I've been the guy going into 1920s Cardiff match reports and finding out all I can about Bleddyn Williams and Gwyn Nichols. But I've also been a young teenage rugby player growing up in the valleys, kind of dreaming of playing at the highest level possible. I didn't because I was crap. But there'll be hundreds and hundreds of kids out there coming into under 16s, under 18s rugby who, when news like this breaks, they wonder, is the opportunity going away? Is the opportunity going to have to go somewhere else? And going forward into the future, the club's priority has to be managing that. And as much as I value the history, right now talking about the history is ego, and the reality in the future is maintaining that player pathway, maintaining the good work that people like Griff Rees have done. That's where the future is going to lie. And I think that needs to be clear and uppermost in everyone's mind before we talk about the history of the club. Because right now, that isn't actually the most important thing. It's the future.
Well said indeed. As has been mentioned on the pod, do get along to Judgment Day to support the club if you can, and particularly that Munster game on Friday the 21st, I think it is. That doesn't sound right, actually. I'm looking at the date now. It's the 10th. It's Friday the 25th. Friday the 25th, the Munster game is. So the tickets will hopefully be back on sale soon for that one. Also, the Rags at home on Saturday. They're playing Llandovery and Super Rugby Cymru. I think it's the last regular season home game of the season. They've got 2 away games to finish. So also get along and support them if you can. For the pod, we'll be back next week. Obviously, there'll still be fallout from this, but we'll also try and get back to some on-field action, looking back over that Connacht game and ahead to Judgment Day. Until then, thank you all very much for joining me. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and we'll catch you soon.
Thanks, Dan.